In this video, we're going to be looking at one of the most vital concepts in economics, which is price elasticity of demand. As you can see from there, from that massive great list taken from the spec, it covers an awful lot of things. And we're going to be covering today the things in yellow, price elasticity of demand. If you look at basic demand theory, we haven't really said much. What we've said is, as prices go up, people don't like it, so demand goes down. Now that's something that almost any kid could tell you, so it's not exactly advanced, is it? So let's look at some extreme examples of inelastic demand. My least favourite water company is Thames Water. Now Thames Water serves about 16 million people, that's about a quarter of the UK population, and they do not have a good track record. As it says there, their credibility is disappearing with its cash. Their bonds have been labelled junk by credit agencies recently. They are planning to increase bills by 44%. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. And in terms of their performance, have a look at that figure just above my head. They have pumped 72 billion litres of sewage, that's the stuff just to my left, into the rivers in 2 years. Now that works out, every day they are releasing 100 million litres of sewage. We know what sewage is, it comes from our toilets into rivers. Now the head of Thames Water has received a performance bonus of something like £200,000. Now I hasten to think what his bonus would have been if he hadn't been polluting our rivers quite so much. So it's not a good firm, quite frankly, and there's a fair chance that by the time you view this, it would have been taken over by the government because it's in financial trouble. So they are planning, as I say, to increase prices by 44% over the next 5 years. They're not going to be allowed to do that by the regulator for such a really appalling performance. So if I hate the company so much, why don't I leave? If say I had a mobile phone by a firm that was releasing poison into my ear and was planning to increase its price by 44% in the near future, I'd probably go to a different mobile phone provider. So why don't I just leave Thames Water? Well, if you think about it, the answer is pretty obvious. In order to leave this company, I would need to move house. To move house, that would probably mean moving job or having a much longer commute in. It would mean any children would have to change their schools. It would mean that we'd lose our local friends. So that is unlikely to happen. So despite that 44% price rise, and it's that really that we're interested in when we're looking at elasticity of demand. The demand for Thames Water is going to stay roughly the same. So we call that a near totally inelastic demand curve. The price is going to rise by quite a substantial amount. Whether they get the full amount that they want or not really doesn't matter. It will go up by quite a big amount, and virtually nobody is going to leave. So on that demand curve, you can see the quantity stays pretty much exactly the same despite that big increase in price on the y-axis. So that has an elasticity of demand of 0. Let's take an opposite scenario, say the wheat market. Now the price of wheat at the time of recording is $5.80 per bushel. Those figures are in cents in that table opposite my head. Now imagine that you're a wheat farmer and you are trying to sell your wheat at market. As you can see from that picture above my head, there are lots and lots and lots of sellers. So let's say that you decide to ask for, say, oh, I don't know, $5.81 for your wheat. Nobody would buy from you because the buyers can get all they want from the other sellers for $5.80. Your sales would disappear down to 0, even if you just went for 1 cent above the market price. So in that case, even a tiny increase in the price that you're trying to sell at from P1 to P2 would lead to all of your demand disappearing from Q1 all the way down to 0. So that has an elasticity of demand of infinity. So the definition of price elasticity of demand is the responsiveness of demand to a change in price. And basically, if we get a big response, that means it's elastic. And if we get a tiny response, then that means it's inelastic. Now, how to measure it? Two ways. You could measure it by calculating the percentage change in quantity demanded and divide that by the percentage change in price. Or you could use this weirdo formula: change in quantity times original price divided by the quantity multiplied by the change in price. I'm going to go through examples of both of those. Now, the point about price elasticity of demand is that it's nearly always negative, because if price goes up, demand goes down. And that means that we can actually ignore the minus sign. So ignoring the minus sign, if we get an answer that's more than 1, we call that an elastic situation. If we get an answer that's less than 1, it's an inelastic situation. And if we get an answer that's exactly 1, then that is unitary elasticity. You don't tend to get that very often, but it does come up on theme 3. So here's a worked example. Let's imagine that you are selling a printer for £50 and you sell 200 units. You increase your price to £60, as a result of which your sales fall back to 120. Now, using the first formula, that's the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. Well, if we go from 200 units down to 120 units, we have lost 40% of our units. The price has gone up from £50 to £60. That's a 20% rise in price. So minus 40 divided by 20 equals minus 2. Now, working the other way round, the change in quantity as we go from 200 down to 120 is minus 80. The original quantity, Q, was 200. The original price, P, was £50, and the change in price is £10. So multiplying all that up, the top line gives us minus 4,000, the bottom line gives us 2,000, minus 4,000 divided by 2,000 is minus 2. So whichever way you calculate it, the answer is minus 2, which makes it elastic. And again, this could be a good place to take a pause, because we've just done some formulae, and probably you're going to want to practice some of those formulae. The next thing that the spec wants us to look at is the relationship between price elasticity of demand and revenue. Now, revenue is found by price times quantity. It's actually the area under the demand curve, because the y-axis is price and the x-axis is quantity. So the total revenue was 200 units times £50, or £10,000. And after the price rise, it's 120 units times £60 is £7,200. So remember, demand was elastic and our total revenue fell. So generally, if demand is elastic, a price rise leads to a fall in total revenue, and if demand is inelastic, a price rise will lead to a rise in total revenue. So if we take our water example, if they jack up our water bills, they are going to receive a big increase in their revenue. And again, could be a good place to take a pause, because we've got a relationship between price elasticity of demand and revenue. By the way, if total revenue doesn't change as a result of a price change, that means we've got an elasticity of demand of -1. If you remember, our perfectly elastic demand curve was a flat line. So a relatively elastic demand curve is a relatively flat line. As you can see there, as the price goes up from P1 to P2, we lose a lot of customers. And those customers that are being lost from Q1, that should be Q2, the revenue loss is shown by that red area. Now the price has gone up, so on those units that we are selling, we're going to make a little bit more revenue. So that area in green shows the increase in revenue from the higher price. But you can see our revenue is going to drop because that red area is much bigger than our green area. And again, remember that our totally inelastic demand curve was a vertical line. So a relatively inelastic demand curve is a steep line as shown here. Now once again, we're going to show an increase in price. And as you can see, if we increase the price from P1 to P2, sales do drop from Q1 to Q2, but that isn't a large drop. So though we've lost some customers, the revenue loss is that area in red. But because we've kept most of our customers, the revenue gain from the higher prices shown in green, you can just about make out there that that green area is greater than the red area. So with an inelastic demand curve, that increase in price leads to an increase in total revenue. Now this final curve is one that I don't think I've ever seen it on an exam question, but it is in the spec. And that's a unitary demand curve where the elasticity of demand is always 1, which means that the total revenue is never changing. So the area underneath the demand curve is always exactly the same, and it has that shape there. And again, this could be a good place to take a pause because we've now done perfectly inelastic, relatively inelastic, unitary, relatively elastic and totally elastic demand curves. So now we need to get into the factors that affect elasticity of demand. In other words, what are the things that we need to look for in questions that will determine whether demand for the product that the examiners are asking about is elastic or inelastic? Well, one factor, probably the first thing that people tend to look for, is whether there are a number of close competitors. In other words, if one firm puts their price up, are there other firms that we could go to? So in the case of mobile phones, you can see there are quite a number of different phone sellers. So that would mean if one of them increases their price, they would face quite a large decrease in customers. So the more close competitors there are, ceteris paribus, the more elastic the demand curve is. Now the second thing that we need to look for is basically, is the good expensive compared with our income? Now if the good is expensive, then that means that we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about it. We might not be able to afford it and we'll have to save up. So therefore, if it's an expensive product, that would make it more elastic. So you can see there, those cars, would typically cost, as you can see there, in the thousands of pounds, in some cases in the many thousands of pounds. This is quite a weird one where the used car price is actually more than the new car price. Don't get that very often. But the fact is, cars are expensive. So we think about it. Now, the other example that I've given here is those bars of chocolate. Now, loads and loads and loads of competitors there, lots of bars of chocolate in the same store, but they're relatively cheap. So basically, we don't think about it that much. So if something is expensive, then that makes it more elastic. And if something is cheap, again, compared with our income, that is going to make it less elastic because we don't care as much. So once again, we've got a factor that determines elasticity of demand. Again, it's normally the second thing that people look for when they're answering a question on this. Now the third factor is it a necessity? So water is obviously a necessity. Tap water in our homes is a necessity. We couldn't replace our tap water with, say, bottled water when we're running a bath or flushing the loo. Similarly, if you've got a car, then petrol is a necessity. Addiction also adds to that necessity thing. So I'm a coffee addict, so I have to have my coffee. So if the price of coffee goes up, it's barely going to affect my consumption of coffee. And of course, some people are addicts, like drink addicts, alcoholics, or cigarette addicts. So if they are faced with a price rise, I'm afraid that they've still got to have their addiction. Now, brand loyalty tends to make a product less elastic, because you are buying the brand rather than buying the price. So you think about your mobile phones. If you had an iPhone before, I'm willing to bet that the replacement phone you get is going to be an iPhone. If you had a Samsung before, you'd probably replace that with another Samsung. And an extreme example that I'm going to come back to later, if you are currently a Manchester United fan, you are likely to be a Manchester United fan until you die. And the final thing is time. The longer people have to make an adjustment, the greater the elasticity. So let's say, for example, that the price of oil and gas to heat your home goes up massively. Well, you might think, I'm going to get in some solar panels. But immediately you're still going to have to run your boiler or whatever on gas or electricity. In a year's time, once you've bought those solar panels and installed them, you might be able to move to a different energy source. So in the immediate short term, it's going to be more inelastic than in the longer term. Again, this could be a good place to take a pause. Now, on the spec, it says that we need to look at the types of goods that the government places taxes on or gives subsidies to. Now, in the case of tax, the typical ones that come up on questions and typical ones that the government tax are petrol, cigarettes and alcohol. So the question is why? Well, if we look at the number of close competitors, well, with petrol, there's nothing. I can't run my car on anything other than petrol. With cigarettes, there's a few. You might look at vaping, you might look at e-cigarettes, and again with alcohol, there's a few things. So for example, alcohol-free lager might be a replacement for alcohol. But basically there aren't many close competitors, which would make those products inelastic. Now, as a percentage of most people's income, all of these things is relatively low. Most people can afford petrol, most people can afford a few boxes of cigarettes a week, and most people can afford alcohol. So again, inelastic. What about necessity or addiction? Well, petrol is a necessity. Cigarettes are an addiction for some people. Alcohol is an addiction for some people, which would again make it inelastic. So the government tends to tax inelastic goods. So sales are not greatly affected, which means that the government make quite a lot of money in tax revenue. And because sales haven't gone down by much, workers in those industries aren't going to be greatly affected. So unemployment isn't going to be particularly hit. So the government basically doesn't tax these things primarily to stop people from doing them or using them. It does it as a revenue raiser. Now, one question that has come up before is about the age bands and cigarette consumption. Now, if you look at the data, people between the ages of 16 and 25 have got a price elasticity of demand for cigarettes of minus 0.77. They're inelastic. But people 65 plus, it's minus 0.45, much more inelastic. So the question is, why do younger people have a higher elasticity of demand for cigarettes than older people? Well, if we look at the number of close competitors, younger people are far more likely to use vapes or e-cigarettes. Older people not so likely to do that. So that makes younger people more elastic. Now, younger people tend to be poorer than older people, which would make the percentage of income spent by a younger person higher than the percentage of an older person's income. So again, that would make the younger person more elastic. Now, by definition, someone who's older would have had a lot more time to get addicted to nicotine. Whereas with a younger person, you know, if say you're 18, then it's unlikely that you'd have been smoking for more than 8 years, absolute top whack. So the older person will be more addicted than the younger person. And again, that makes the younger person more elastic than an older person. So we've got 3 reasons there to account for the fact that these younger people are more elastic than older people. So what about football season tickets? They tend to be relatively expensive. If you've got Fulham there at the top, they've increased the price of their most expensive season ticket from about £1,000 to about £3,000 between 2023 and 2024. Man United, still quite expensive, but they've held their prices constant at about £950. Spurs have held theirs constant, but at £2,000. West Ham have increased the price from about £1,000 to about £1,600. Now, the fact is, all of these are relatively expensive. So again, we're going to do an analysis. In every case, there are close competitors. There's 20 teams in the Premiership. So by itself, with that amount of competition, demand should be elastic. Now, if you look at the percentage of income, we're looking at, say, 3,000 quid or 2,000. Now, by anyone's standards, these are relatively high figures compared to people's income. So, again, with a high percentage of your income being spent on the good, that would make it more elastic. But brand loyalty, we're talking football here. Massive brand loyalty, which would make it inelastic. So I've got 2 elastic factors and 1 inelastic factor. So what it's going to be? Well, it isn't straight 2-1. It's basically a game of top trumps, and the game that wins this game of top trumps is that brand loyalty. It far outscores the other 2. So we have an inelastic situation. So let's finish up with some elasticity examples. If you were to buy a Canon printer of the type shown, it would cost you less than £30. And basically, Canon will not make a profit on selling that printer. You know, the amount of sophisticated circuitry and parts in it would mean that they would make a loss on that printer. So why do they do that? And why is printer ink so expensive? So on the right hand side, just above my head, there is the cartridge, the official cartridge that goes with that particular printer. So you can get 2 cartridges, one black and white, one multicolour, for just £45. Now that works out at roughly £1,800 per litre of printer ink. That's far more expensive than most champagnes. So the cartridges, those 2 cartridges, will cost about half as much again as that printer. So why? Well, if you're making the decision to buy a printer, you've got lots and lots of choice. There are lots of other competitors at the ruling market price. You don't have to buy a Canon. You could buy a Hewlett-Packard, you could buy an Epson, you could buy lots and lots of other types. So you are elastic. But once you've bought that Canon, you basically have to buy Canon printer ink. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So you've got less choice. You are inelastic. Now, one of the things you can do is, of course, buy clone ink, which is relatively cheap. That's what I do. Canon will tell you, don't touch this because it might ruin your printer. Canon are wrong, but that's the image that they're trying to give. They're trying to persuade you desperately not to buy that cheaper ink, because if you do that, it will take away from their profit. So they make a loss on the printer, but a massive profit on those people that continue to buy, if you like, their branded ink. Second example, why do car insurance firms charge more to existing customers rather than new customers? It basically pays you to shop around if you are renewing your insurance. Well, most people don't. I don't. You know, unless the figure gets to be ridiculously high, I'll stick with the one that I've been with for a couple of years. So that means that in the background they can jack up the price because you have consumer inertia, which is effectively brand loyalty. If you are a new customer, then you've got lots and lots of firms that you could potentially buy from. So the insurance firms have got to offer you a good deal to try to attract you. So my third, and you'll be pleased to hear, final example. Why are air tickets bought in advance much cheaper than those bought close to the flight date? So here, for example, you can see that a flight from Venice Marco Polo Airport to London Stansted, bought the day after I recorded this, would cost £216. Whereas if I'd have waited about a month, I could buy exactly the same ticket for £20. So there's basically a 900,000% difference between the price bought in about a month's time and the price bought tomorrow. Well, again, it comes down to elasticity. If I'm traveling to from Marco Polo to London Stansted tomorrow, there's got to be a reason for it. Maybe I've got to get there for a business meeting. Maybe I've got to get there for a family event that's just cropped up as an emergency. So I don't have much choice. In a month's time, I've got loads of choice. I don't have to go to that particular journey. I could choose my date. I could go on lots of other places. I could got lots and lots of other people who I could get those particular flights from. So that accounts for that massive, it's called price discrimination, that we cover on theme 3. So we covered one heck of a lot. Elasticity comes up pretty much every paper. So you do need to learn it. You need to learn the concepts. You need to learn the features, the things that cause good to be elastic or inelastic. You need to know the formulae. You need to know the diagrams. Thank you for listening.